Good afternoon, and welcome to the Sustainable Materials Management webinar series, a joint effort between the National Recycling Coalition and the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center. My name is Wayne Bowen, and I'm the Program Manager for the Recycling Market Center, and I will serve as your moderator today. We would like to extend a special thanks to Bob Hollis of the Mobius Network for providing the webinar management software for this series, and Lisa Ruggiero of the National Recycling Coalition for providing technical support. Today's webinar focus is on steel recycling. Following this presentation, we will conduct a question and answer session. If you have a question or comment, please use the GoToWebinar dialog box located in the control panel on your screen. You may also use the dialog box to request assistance if you are experiencing technical difficulties during the webinar. Please note that this webinar, like all the webinars in this series, is being recorded and will be made available as a YouTube video. Links to these videos can be found on both the National Recycling Coalition and Recycling Market Center websites. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Casey Fenton. Casey is a communications assistant for the Steel Recycling Institute. He's been working on behalf of the environmental advancements of the North American steel industry since 2010. Fenton joined the SRA after graduating from Penn State University, where he earned a BA in corporate communications. Fenton works along with communicators from the American Iron and Steel Institute and the Steel Market Development Institute to facilitate grassroots communication efforts, working with both the public and private sectors to promote awareness of steel's recycling accomplishments and sustainable advancements. And now I'd like to hand the program over to Casey.
Thank you very much, Wayne. Like you said, my name is Casey Fenton. I'm happy to be here. I've been working on behalf of SRI for about 3 years. When I first started this position, I didn't know much about steel recycling. Obviously, it's not a subject that a lot of people look up and learn about, for amusement. So I hit the ground running, and although I'll be the first to admit that I'm no expert, and people in the industry for 20, 30 years will tell you they aren't either. I'm learning more every day. So I feel I can provide you with some great information about the industry today, the process of steel recycling, and the importance of that process. At the end, I'll be happy to hear any of your questions, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Of course, if I don't have the answer for you today, I'll make sure to give you my contact information and give you the best answer as soon as possible. So some brief information about the Steel Recycling Institute. A lot of you may have heard of us before, and Wayne mentioned how we're associated with AISI and SMDI. We were actually founded in 1988 as the Steel Can Recycling Institute. Our primary mission then was to promote and sustain effective post-consumer steel can recycling in the U.S. By 1993, SCRI decided to recycle the can out of our name and begin focusing on all industries of steel scrap production. And that's the Steel Recycling Institute that you know today. Every ounce of steel scrap, no matter what product, is valuable. And that was one of the reasons why we decided to expand our focus. We've been working with NRC for a long time. In fact, our former president, Bill Heenan, is a lifetime chair of NRC. And he was actually named the 2004 Recycler of the Year. The Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center, RMC, has an award named after him as well. So organizations like NRC and events that they promote, such as this, are vitally important to the industry, and like I said, I'm thrilled to be here to discuss it. SRI is also very proud to have played a role in steel becoming North America's #1 most recycled material. More steel is recycled annually than paper, aluminum, glass, and plastic combined. We had an overall recycling rate last year of 92%, and over 90 million tons of steel were recycled that year. Despite our high numbers, however, we know there is a lot more work to be done. We actively work alongside recycling coordinators, such as many of you here, to provide educational materials and assistance in promoting recycling, and we work with companies such as NRC, Habitat for Humanity, Appliance Recycling Centers of America, Keep America Beautiful, and PROP, the Professional Recyclers of Pennsylvania, among other state organizations as well. We're set right outside of Pittsburgh, and we share our office with other steel-focused companies such as the Canned Food Alliance that promotes the nutritional value of steel canned food, and the Steel Market Development Institute, who also promote the benefits of steel across all markets. The presentation I'm giving here today is called Steel Recycling 101, and the 101 is appropriate. It's a very high-level introductory lesson on the steel industry and its recycling infrastructure. I've given this presentation multiple times at certification classes for hopeful recycling coordinators, and it's a good foundation to build from before learning more of the details of the industry. So I know some of you on this call have been with the industry for a long time, and a lot of this information may seem like common sense. So I then ask for you to look at it from the perspective of, what do you want new young professionals in our industry to learn and understand before they join you as your peers? Time permitting, at the end of the Q&A, or if you reach out to me directly after the webinar, I'd love to hear your suggestions on what information you wish you had when you were starting out and what you wish your current peers were more aware of. Now let's get to the most important question, which is, what is recycling? The definition we have here, passing again through a series of changes or treatments to process in order to regain for human use. The quote is from 1926, and the reason we use this quote is that it's so old. We use an old quote to demonstrate that recycling is nothing new. It's been around for quite a while, in fact, even before this definition. And steel is proud to have a long history with recycling. In fact, as long as there's been steel recycling. The definition of recycling, however, has broadened in recent years. There are a lot of words that people use synonymously with recycling, but there are key differences. You see the words on your screen now: reduce, reuse, recover, reclaim, regain, refresh, restore, renew. A lot of these words are used synonymously, but I'll explain a little bit about each one. The biggest difference comes from a product or material claiming to be recyclable versus it actually being recycled. Steel has always been recyclable, but it wasn't until an infrastructure was in place that it became truly recycled. Recycled is where you want to be. It's where all materials strive to be. A truly recycled material also repeats the same process continuously with minimum to no waste. For example, with steel recycling, when they make a batch, the mills know they will see that steel again if it is recycled at the end of their useful life, regardless of the product it is made into. It will always come back as scrap. Even during the production process, there is something called runaround scrap that is generated at the mill. While they cut and shape the steel for varying uses, they run this extra steel back to the beginning to further minimize waste. One of the primary reasons SRI is part of NRC is to continue to educate and promote all materials and products to make this important jump from recyclable to recycled. We feel that a high tide rises all ships, and if households and businesses recycle more frequently, all of us would benefit. This is how we approach our vision of recycling. Now let's talk about the recycled material, which we call scrap. When people think scrap outside the industry, it usually means something that is discarded or lacking of value. We all know, however, that this isn't the case with the materials on this list. The materials on your left are your traditional recycling. A majority of curbside and dropside programs accept some variety of these. Metal cans, loose paper, green, brown, clear glass, and mixed plastics, oftentimes 1 through 7, or just 1 through 2 mixed. Organics in most places would also refer to leaves and lawn clippings. But for all the scrap listed here, not all of them are continuously recyclable by our definition. For example, paper has about 7 trips through their process before becoming unusable and new material needs to be created. Scrap wood, for example, is reusable but not recyclable. You can't make wood into new wood, so the reuse of wood can only last as long as it's cared for, treated during its useful life, and while it gets continually cut, stripped, sanded, etc. The same goes for rubber. Old tires can be broken down, chopped up, and used as surfaces for tracks at a high school or a college or playgrounds. This is still a beneficial disposal alternative than others, but by definition we don't call this recycling. Truly recyclable products at the end of their useful lives go back through the same process of which they came. That's what makes them a continuous cycle. The recycling symbol itself is actually a clear indication of this. And while many materials want to grab that symbol and claim they're a part of this great thing called recycling, many simply lack the technology or cost-effective methods to do so. It's partially because of these claims that have made the definition of recycling so unnecessarily broad and confusing today. Now, each product or material promotes and educates a responsible disposal method to their consumers. These materials are attempting to minimize their impact on the environment, and we're all on the same team on wanting this goal. Through continued innovations in technologies, the recyclability of materials will expand to a point that they each can be efficiently recycled. Now, during this presentation, obviously, I'll prop up steel's recycling accomplishments and sometimes compare it to other materials, but I want to make it clear that just speaking from steel's perspective, no material is our enemy when it comes to recycling. We're all on the same team. With so many varying markets, a material might be our direct competitor in one, but we work very closely with them in another. This is why it's important to maintain positive relationships amongst all industries and materials and continue to encourage the continued growth and recyclability of all. Now on this slide, you'll see our evidence to our claims of not just being recyclable, but also being very well recycled. They are the steel recycling rates since SRI's inception in 1988. You can see since 2000, we've had a relatively steady climb to our highest healthy rate today of 92%. You may also notice in 2009 an abnormality of a recycling rate of 103%, which based on the chart may seem outstanding. However, it actually means we took in more steel scrap than we produced. In 2009, if you remember, the conditions were that the recycling continued, but recessionary conditions took place in production, meaning more steel was being recycled than being produced. There wasn't a balance in the market, which we'll touch on later in the presentation why that's important. But you can see now that we have a much more balanced and healthier and profitable steel industry. Before we move on from our recycling rates, I want to also briefly touch on where we come up with our recycling rates each year. There are several different methodologies across different industries on how they calculate their recycling rates. Ours takes into account a couple key factors. First is steel life estimates. We know we're not getting back all the steel we're putting out there every year. Bridges, skyscrapers, that material won't be back into the recycling stream for a long time, and that's okay. The long-lasting durability of steel is one of our key characteristics after all. But we do have estimates for each market and product on how long we can hypothesize that the steel will be in use. I'll actually have a slide later on in the presentation that presents those numbers. Utilizing those estimates, we then take a look at the facts we do know. We know how much steel scrap mills are taking in from recycling sources and the type of scrap it is, and then we compare it to the steel that is being produced and what type of products that steel is being produced for. We combine this with a few other internal industry stats, and we're able to come up with our rates each year. Our rates are widely recognized across the industry and by our competitors. This is also the method that has been fine-tuned over our 20-plus years of collecting data. Now, I'd like to take a moment and we'll go over each of our 4 primary markets for steel production and our 4 primary sources of steel scrap coming back into the cycle. Obviously, each market has anywhere from several to dozens of sub-markets, all with their own very unique opportunities, challenges, and methods of recovery, but we'll stay pretty broad on all 4 of these. This is actually one reason why we're, again, so proud of steel's recycling rate. We're pulling in continually high tonnage from such diverse areas. It takes a pretty different system to scrap a car compared to separating a can. The sum of these 4 major markets also doesn't equal the whole. While their contribution is very large, a portion can still come from other sources that don't really fit into any of these 4 major categories. They can be as small as an office file cabinet or as large as a decommissioned naval ship. The first market that we want to touch on is appliances. Anybody who has ever bought or moved an appliance can tell you they are clunky and heavy, especially older models. A lot of us also have old appliances that have been with us for a long time. In fact, I have a basement refrigerator that's practically a family heirloom. When these appliances finally reach the end of their useful lives, the last thing we want to do is dispose of them and have them end up in a landfill. The steel material is just way too valuable. In fact, the average steel weight of a typical fridge is 100 pounds, which is more than the average 7-year-old. So we don't want to have this valuable weight end up in a landfill when it can be used at the scrapyards. Additionally, energy companies want these old appliances off of their energy grid to get new, more efficient Energy Star models to replace them. That's why you often see incentives and promotional programs where companies offer rebates for households to recycle their appliances. There's actually been a pretty popular campaign in recent states that promote themselves as contests, such as finding the oldest refrigerator in the state, and they offer extra incentives for contestants. Households will also enjoy lower utility bills once they get rid of their old appliances off of their home grid. And then the new efficient Energy Star appliances, are just more advanced technology, and they'll be able to save you money instantly. But these types of active programs are just one of many reasons why appliances are recycled with such regularity. And in fact, over 50 million appliances were recycled last year. The second market I want to talk about is automotives. Automobiles are similar to appliances in that their steel material content is far too valuable to not be recycled. Several years you can see here that the recycling rate exceeds 100%, meaning more steel scrap was coming in than new cars being produced. You can also see in the most recent reports, 2011, the number is corrected slightly to 95%, but this comes a little bit more from the recovery in North America's automotive industry than a decrease in scrap intake. 15 million cars were recycled in 2011. The popular Cash for Clunkers is an example of a program, and in 2009 you can notice the spike in the recycling rate partially from that program. An ongoing program through Habitat for Humanity called Car for Homes is a few of several methods for consumers to recycle their old vehicles. Scrapyard infrastructure is also solidly in place nationwide, where automotive recycling has been a near certainty for a long time, as you can see from this chart. Advances in the auto industry have also played a role in recycling tonnage. Older cars that are now being recycled at the end of their useful lives are denser, while today's high-strength steels are lighter and more efficient in maintaining safety standards. So older, heavier cars are being recycled, and that will exceed 100% in the recycling rate. Now, when steel goes into a building or structure, we know and expect that material will be out of the recycling stream for a long time, especially landmark type buildings and structures. We know we're not going to get the steel from the Golden Gate Bridge or the Empire State Building, examples like that. However, it's the benefit of the material that they're long-lasting, strong, and durable. But for example, when a building or structure is being renovated or other ones are being demolished or replaced, that steel scrap, regardless of how long it's been out of the stream, is welcomed back with open arms, just like even a can or an appliance that have not had as long of a useful life. Now, many people still picture demolition as a giant wrecking ball, taking down a structure and then trucking it all away, never to be seen again. However, today's market is a lot more like precise surgeons than big brute strength. It's actually more accurate to call it deconstruction. They extract every resource they have, whether it be steel framing, aluminum roof, bricks, anything that could potentially be reused. They will take it apart carefully and sell it to offset their overall costs. This is a huge source of steel scrap for the industry just because of the sheer volume of material. Even blowing up bridges, they prepare to catch and extract as much as they can from the river or valley below the bridge and sell it or reuse it in a new structure. The members of the construction industry are immaculate recyclers, some of the best, and it has actually basically been a required part of business for several years to recycle. Those who don't recycle or do so inefficiently are simply throwing money out the door and won't remain in business for very long. Containers, as we discussed, was originally Steel Recycling Institute's primary focus. And if you look at this chart, you can see the progress we've made from our inception. From 15% in 1988 to setting new all-time highs every year for the past several years. And with the help of recycling coordinators, organizations such as NRC, and presentations such as this, it will continue to grow. There wasn't always a market for steel cans at all. It wasn't considered economically necessary or worthwhile to recycle containers on their own. Originally, the only way cans would be recycled would be you would load the trunk of an old Buick or something like that, and they would be recycled at the same time. But we quickly found out that it was good for the environment and for business that cans be allowed to be recycled on their own. Every single ounce of steel saves some natural resources and landfill space. Today, more than 1,500 food items come in steel cans, and over 100 million food cans are used by Americans every single day. You can also see that the infrastructure provides the opportunity for most Americans, 98%, to recycle their cans directly at their curbside. Now, so if the cans exist and the infrastructure exists, why aren't we capturing more than 71%? We must continue to educate this consumer-heavy market on the benefits of recycling their household steel, food, and beverage cans, the same way we educate other industries on the benefit of steel recycling. Even though each can is only a bit over 50 grams in weight, which is a huge difference, obviously, between large, clunky steel sources like appliances or automobiles, that steel is just as valuable. A single container is much harder to capture than these big items, though, since it can be easily thrown into a garbage bag just because it's a few steps closer than the recycling bin, and then it's lost, unfortunately. Bundles of steel scrap are also created with allotted amounts of steel cans. Steelmakers rely on these cans due to their properties they're melted into, making them an essential ingredient in the steel making process. This isn't the only area, however, that has room for growth in the containers market. I want to touch on this subgroup just because it's so important, aerosol cans. And this is where a lot of you as industry leaders would come in. About 90% of aerosol cans are made out of steel. This is a huge source of steel production that isn't getting the same recognition in return as other valuable recycled material. Misconceptions about the dangers of these products have them incorrectly labeled in many programs as hazardous chemicals, that they can only be accepted on rare special collection days, oftentimes only once or twice a year. However, by educating consumers and recycling coordinators, along with the inclusion of the steel recycling logo, as you see here on the right, we feel that this is an area that will continue to see rapid growth. One of these misconceptions are that aerosols contain CFCs that are hazardous when the product is used. The fact is, aerosols do not use CFC propellants and haven't for more than 30 years since they were banned by the EPA in the late 70s. This chemical is often what makes people label these products as hazardous to both recycling facilities and the ozone. However, like I said, it's simply not true in today's age, but it's unfortunately a myth that continues to be incorrectly told around the industry, especially those who have been in the industry for a long time. Many programs also fear the recycling of full or partially full cans. However, studies have shown that recycled aerosol cans are not only empty, but very empty. Consumers buy these products to use them and will use every last drop they can before disposing of them. Many curbside programs who do not publicly endorse the recycling of steel aerosol cans are still finding these products in their stream, since an empty aerosol can is indistinguishable from any other steel container. These barriers have been removed, physically, but now we need to get the mental barrier removed, and we need to remove the recycling barrier and start promoting these as viable and valuable steel sources of scrap. And there's many reasons to include these empty steel aerosol cans in recycling programs today. No additional preparations are necessary. If a program is already recycling steel cans, they can immediately begin accepting aerosol cans. As I mentioned before, they're indistinguishable, and due to their inherent magnetic properties, they can be recycled just as easily. Additionally, landfill avoidance. The more materials recycled, the fewer that go to landfill. Adding empty steel aerosol cans to a program will divert additional material from landfills, aiding in cost avoidance in terms of tipping fees, and it will also increase the volume and revenue of the local recycling program. Excuse me. Adding empty steel aerosol cans to the recycling program will increase the revenue, as I mentioned, and it will also boost local enthusiasm. Local residents are generally enthusiastic about the addition of materials in the recycling programs. It's a positive story for the community and can be written about by local newspapers or publications, which will encourage non-participants or partial participants currently to who are not, may not be recycling to their household's full capacity to reassess their waste output. The bottom line is there is a need for aerosol products. Cleaning supplies, hairspray, products for the garage, or handiwork. Consumers don't want to feel guilty about using these products they've grown to rely upon, and then not being able to responsibly dispose of them. Now that we touched on those specific industries, let's take a step back and let's look at the industry overall. The life cycle of recycling materials is often referred to as cradle to grave, which is a common phrase for a product talking about its life to death. But for truly recyclable materials such as steel, which are recycled through the same process they're created, cradle to cradle actually describes it a bit more accurately. Here you see the basic four-step process of that life cycle. It begins with those who accumulate the scrap, those who take that scrap from them, those who accept that delivery and then sort it until finally the mill who turns that scrap back into products the original gatherers want to purchase. But let's start at the top. Consumers are donors of sort to the curbside recycling bin, a charitable donation to Mother Earth. Households generally are recycling for reasons other than making money. They can receive small vouchers or trade-in rebates for appliances and automobiles like we discussed, but generally their reasons for recycling come from other sources. In commercial and industries, they are working with bigger scrap quantities, so they have accumulated enough value to actually become sellers at that point. For example, the industry standard of deconstruction companies offset some costs by recycling old materials once the building is leveled. Getting paid to sell this scrap is a no-brainer when the alternative is paying someone else to haul it to a landfill. Now that these materials are collected and transported through the waste management company from a blue bin or drop off to a MRF, a material recovery facility, all the recyclables are then loaded onto a sorting line. There's different methods of sorting different materials that come into play, but we'll focus obviously on the method for steel, which is magnetic separation. Steel food containers and empty steel aerosol cans, like all steel products, are magnetically attracted. Virtually all MRFs have magnetic belts, which are used to separate this valuable steel scrap from the rest of the fluff. Once sorted, they fall into a large bin and then are baled. They bale the scrap into different grades, so they will know the chemical composition of each for the mills to buy. Think of each different classification sort of like soup bouillon cubes, if you've ever made those. You know the ingredients that are combined into them, so you know what it will become once it's heated up. The different ingredients will provide the varying levels of strength, flexibility, and so on for the thousands of unique steel products. A successful recycling coordinator is the one that can facilitate cooperation between the first three stages to create a successful opportunity in the fourth. Okay, so we have this infrastructure now in place, but why should people be utilizing it? Why do we recycle at all? There is an entire industry dedicated towards the process of recycling that shows that recyclables are a commodity. Huge corporations, millions of direct and indirect jobs. Of course, all of you here today are here because of recycling or indirectly in relation to it. If tomorrow everybody decided to stop recycling, ignoring the huge environmental disaster, there would be a tremendous amount of people who couldn't support themselves or their families anymore. It's not a reason that a lot of companies are going to promote, please recycle so we can make money, but make no question about it, it's absolutely a reason. There are two types of green that we're talking about here. Now, a lone steel can makes economic sense to collect, ship, melt, and manufacture. You recover that cost by offsetting the cost of new materials, or the examples we keep coming back to, deconstruction companies offsetting their costs by selling steel to processors. Households also get the vouchers or different programs, so they put towards new appliances. And the most obvious and publicized reason, the environment. It's easier and more efficient energy, water, natural resources wise, to create products utilizing older or no longer useful versions of the same product or material. We're removing this dead weight of no longer useful old scrap, and through whichever process the material demands, we're recreating something that is once again useful and oftentimes more efficient than its predecessor. Um, in addition, we talked about landfill space. Every time something that could have been recycled is thrown away, it's a huge opportunity lost. For a lot of materials that don't break down naturally into the environment, it's a large, clunky reminder for many, many years, and it's taking up space and costing money to store it unnecessarily. Now, if any of the above reasons didn't sway you yet, what about it's the law? In many states, I'll use Pennsylvania as an example. There are laws ranging from local municipalities up to Harrisburg that demand action on recycling. One example is Act 101, the Municipal Waste Planning, Recycling, and Waste Reduction Act, was passed in 1988, which at the time, and it may still be true, made Pennsylvania the largest state that actually required recycling. Municipalities with populations of at least 10,000 had 2 years to implement curbside recycling programs. Municipalities with populations between 5,000 and 10,000 had to implement programs within 3 years. They began charging municipalities a per ton fee for waste that they chose to landfill. This was a large motivating factor for obvious reasons, and it really jump-started a lot of programs in the early 90s. Now, recycling is also just a natural biological process. Materials want to break down to their raw ingredients. Metals rust, food composts, things disintegrate. Through recycling, we're just speeding up this process by breaking things down and recreating them in a controlled, accelerated process rather than waiting for nature to take her time. And lastly, this isn't listed, but it also just feels good. The recycling is helping all the ways I just listed, and you know that you took the extra effort to do something that is the right thing to do. Never underestimate positive endorphins as a motivating factor. All right, now let's talk specifically about recycling steel. A lot of the reasons are exactly the same. The economics have been discussed thoroughly throughout the presentation. With enough quantity, your company is getting paid to give the material back to its source just so they could use it again. If only every industry was that giving. Obviously, the environment, the sustainability of steel cannot be understated, both in energy savings and in natural resources. Did you know recycling a single can conserves the equivalent energy to light a 60-watt light bulb for more than 4 hours? Or wash a load of laundry, make a pot of coffee. Each can makes a tangible difference. By using recycled steel rather than virgin materials, 74% less steel is actually needed in production. You can see the massive amounts of natural resources that can be saved per ton. And if you remember way back in the first slide, I mentioned 90 million tons of steel were recycled last year. So, you can do the math and see how much that adds up. And of course, sounding like a broken record, saving landfill space. There's a finite amount of available land that can be used simply for storing our trash. Why do we want to fill this area with something unnecessarily, especially something that can provide such a huge benefit elsewhere? So I presented you with all these reasons as to why we recycled steel. But remember, it's an industry for a reason, and that industry needs to support itself. The two types of green in recycling that I was talking about. Does recycling save money? Does it make money? Despite all the environmental benefits, not many people or companies would be dedicating their lives to recycling if they couldn't support themselves and their families through it. The costs are there. There's a burden of entry that must be taken upon for each recycling process. But nobody would incur these costs if there wasn't a chance for return revenue. It's more of an investment than a cost. Collection costs come from the vehicles that pick up curbside or from deconstruction sites, the salaries of the people on that vehicle, drop-off property costs, ordering bins, etc. Processing requires machines to sort, jobs of people that assist in that process, transporting the materials from processors to mills through barges or rail systems, and the mills themselves, initial building, jobs of employees, machines maintenance, new equipment, and so on. But for each one of these steps, these are costs to one person, but they are revenue for someone else. So while you're paying for the recycling, that person you just handed that check to is making money from that same recycling. So people will gladly hand a check out of one hand if they know it'll come back around with a larger check to the other. Just like the continuous life cycle of steel, the life cycle of cost versus revenue in this process continues. Companies rely upon one another to keep the cycle efficient and smooth. Savings comes from physical benefits of avoiding landfill costs, and that landfill can then use that space avoidance by filling it with other materials that are unrecyclable, that they haven't found a way yet to be responsibly disposed of. Businesses turning a profit from selling the scrap and offsetting costs, and recycling centers and programs, they're part of communities. If the communities aren't paying for recycling, they're paying for landfill use. So by paying for recycling, it must also take into account cost avoidance. Local municipalities will take the lowest bidder for recycling pickup, but the money they're spending on recycling is oftentimes a huge budgetary relief when comparing it to the costs of paying for landfill dumping. Now, a lot of you are familiar, I'm sure, with many of these, the different recycling supply options. We've seen how the industry operates. Let's see where the sources of the scrap are that are feeding the machine. According to SRI's National Recycling Database, it's a database that we run with over 35,000 records. There are nearly 8,000 curbside programs in the U.S. This number grows every day, and those that do exist continue to add new materials, whether it be additional plastics, cardboard, or we hope, steel aerosol cans. Waste-to-energy plants are the standard in states like Florida, but there are actually about 80 plants still operating nationwide. The materials come in mixed, and everything is burnt in an incinerator. A magnet then comes in and removes the steel from the ash and recycles it at that point, the same as any other process. For a scrap dealer or a broker, they are negotiating a lot of pricing, taking it from the commercial facilities and then turning it over to the mills themselves. This saves businesses and governments from having to directly negotiate and take on many costs if they aren't turning over a lot of materials. Large establishments, kitchens, restaurants, factories, that they have a large amount of recycled goods may negotiate on their own. However, many group together with similar local businesses and increase their total quantity of scrap, which provides them with more leverage in negotiation and will get better prices. A savvy negotiator knows what's generated in their stream and is able to get the best price in these discussions. Now, here is a map of North America's steel plants. And as to be expected, many of them are along the Great Lakes. And if you look closely, there are a few red boxes around Chicago, Eastern Ohio, Western PA. That indicates that there's just several within there, too small to show on this map scale. I was lucky enough to actually tour one down in Mobile, Alabama a few years ago, along with a few around Pittsburgh and Ohio. And I highly recommend a tour of a facility if you can arrange one or if you've never actually been. The feeling of heat off of a furnace as you pass by, with that massive scale of some of the plants is truly remarkable and really gives you an appreciation of the process. Now, here's the slide that I foreshadowed to earlier, the estimated useful lifetimes for the different products. These are estimates that we anticipate that the steel products will be ready to be either replaced or they've been used and will receive this steel back in the form of scrap. Obviously, there are outliers to these estimates. Like I mentioned, the Golden Gate Bridge, historical landmarks. We won't be getting that steel back anytime soon. And I'm sure there's a few bomb shelters back from Y2K with a few forgotten Campbell soup cans, that haven't seen the light of day in many years, But additionally, there'll also be a very small loss of material we don't ever receive back, whether it be through some type of environmental or unnatural contamination as well. Now, here is the food chain of recycling markets, which is simplified overview of what we discussed in the industry slide. Overall, it's basic economics. As the market, in this case, the desire for steel products, rises, companies will require more steel scrap to meet this demand. If they need more steel scrap, they're willing to pay more for it to make sure they have enough. Like I talked about the importance for balance, ideally the entire market is balanced and the industry overall is actually rather self-regulating. It's self-regulating because when scrap prices are high, the collectors and processors are profiting, but the mills are being forced to pay more. When prices are low, the mills are able to buy more for cheap, which encourages increased production and lower costs, so companies are more willing to buy steel. But now the collectors and processors are less motivated to sell their scrap and will sometimes sit on quantities until the price is more favorable. So you can see how both sides benefit the most when the market is balanced. Here are a few additional thoughts. Like I said, I'm sure most of you will find a lot of this information and these thoughts common sense through your experiences. But this is what we sort of tell people who want to join the industry based on our feedback and work with recycling coordinators. Speak the language of the industry. There's a variation of vocabulary across different markets, different regions, and who you speak with. And if you don't understand, make sure to get clarification. And remember in your future dealings with that person, there's a lot of shorthand and acronyms, and if you try and fake it till you make it, a lot of times the products or the dealings will have problems, and then you'll run into future business issues. Know the players, and this actually touches on loyalty as well. There's a limited number of players in the recycling game, and you never know where those people have been, who they know, or where they may be someday. We want to recycle bridges, not burn them. The last thing you want to do is tell off Joe Schmo scrap processing down the street because he raised prices on you, and then you find out in a month that they were bought out by a large company that you're currently working with. The market conditions are always fluctuating, and if you need to leave a business relationship, always make sure it's on good terms. It's also never a bad idea to network with your peers. Join trade organizations, go to meetups, discuss things online, attend webinars such as this one, and build relationships that will continue to raise the reputation of your business. Now, understand material processing. For a metaphor, say you're starting a pizza shop. You're going to want to know a lot about dough, sauce, and cheese, right? The same is true with material processing. The more you know, the fewer amount of things that are out of your control. A simple understanding of the basics is a must, but know that the learning process is never over. Stemming from that is the proper preparation of materials to market specs. If you enter a community and they are doing, say, source separation with 5 bins, or it's single stream 1 bin, they're doing this for a reason. Understand the history of your community and how they reached this point, before you try and swim against the current and disrupt it. Now, if you've done your research and think there's a better way, by all means go for it, but make sure you're going in educated. Additionally, like we discussed before, with the different chemical composition for end users, if they ask for a specific mix of materials, make sure you give the customer what they ask for. There's a reason they're asking for that specifically, and if you can't provide it for them, like all businesses, they'll find someone who can. Now, lastly, adapting to change, is not just a lesson for this industry, it's really a life lesson. Things are constantly changing, and as a recycling coordinator or a industry professional, you have to deal with new laws, EPA regulations, changes in your market mix or stream. You have to work with what the community gives you, and prices can also be negotiated. Be flexible and consistently be looking for the most efficient ways to do things as the changes come. Now I've talked for the past couple dozen slides about how we need to keep improving on the success we already have. These are a few examples of how we're doing that through SRI, and how you can help as well. Our educational program is kindergarten through 12th grade curriculum, and it's certified and available for free on the AISI website through our Steel store. We've distributed to hundreds of schools, classrooms, even households, and recycling programs. We also just recently launched our new children's website aimed at sort of middle school age children, called Roscoe's Recycle Room at recycleroom.org, where kids can play games, submit their own recycling stories, learn fun facts. We have infographics they can download as well. So really going after the younger kids and educating them now about the benefits of recycling and benefits of recycling steel, as they grow up, and they grow up in a culture of pro-recycling. By the time they reach the age where they're entering the industry, and several dozen years, when they grow up, 20 years. That will really make a difference in the long term because it's something that they grew up and they understand. Additionally, events and programs such as this, run by companies such as NRC and attended by people like you, industry professionals and leaders, they're taking the time to continue learning and looking for ways to improve their communities. If each coordinator or professional would put forth the effort, like everyone in attendance is today, the overall industry would improve right along with them. Now, the National Recycling Database I mentioned briefly earlier, it's a collection of over 35,000 recycling programs, centers, scrapyards, and contacts that SRI manages, and I personally update regularly. The database is publicly searchable on our website, and I speak with multiple households every week to offer them information on where they can recycle their steel products. As we continue, our efforts and new programs open up constantly, which is great, our database unfortunately continues to need more and more frequent updates. That's why we've started a lot of partnerships with local recycling coordinators, and their help has been invaluable in providing us with updated information on their programs and their local recycling options, so we can maintain the most up-to-date information and provide it to people in need. So I ask all of you, following the webinar or later this afternoon, log on to our website, recycle-steel.org, go to our steel recycling locator page, and just search around on your local municipality, your local curbside program, and see if we do have your most up-to-date information. And if not, you can contact me directly and provide it, and I'll make sure it's updated that day. It benefits all of us to have the most updated information and to provide it for your local municipality. Lastly, social media. So SRI manages several social media accounts under the environmental name, Twitter, Facebook, Google Plus accounts, among others, and we use them as opportunities to sort of engage with both industry professionals, such as yourselves, and directly to consumers, whether it's just promoting third-party news articles or our own press releases that support our messaging. We also congratulate cities, on starting their new curbside program that initiates that relationship with that program to hopefully continue a back and forth dialogue, so we can discuss, for example, aerosol cans or get updates from them for our database. We also provide help to people tweeting out a question, if somebody tweets out, where can I recycle my appliance? We can respond to them. We also have run Facebook contests to give things away, like an America Recycles Day t-shirt or a prize pack. Being available and engaging with users is pretty much just a must in almost any business in today's age, and obviously our industry is no different. Your customers, community members, and colleagues are there, and you should be too. With that, it comes to, just about wraps up my presentation today. I'd like to thank everyone for attending once again. It was truly a pleasure to discuss recycling with you. And I'd be happy to take any questions once I pass it over to Wayne. But like I said, if you think of any questions at a later date, or if you prefer a written response, you can see my email address on the screen, or I'm sure you can reach out and they can provide it for you. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Casey. That was an excellent presentation. We are now going to field some questions from our presenter. Again, if you have a question, please enter them in the GoToWebinar dialog box. We do have a few questions already, and this one deals with incinerator ash, which I believe Casey mentioned earlier. Does the industry count the incinerator steel recovered as part of the recycling rate?
That's a good question, and yes, we do. We whenever it goes through the incinerator, just like in any type of MRF, a bar goes across the ash and it magnetically pulls out those steel products from that ash. So at that point, it would be exactly the same as if it was baled from any other type of stream, and it's delivered to the mill at that point. Separated from that. So when we take our count, when we get that type of material, regardless of its original source or its original separation method, it's coming to the mill in very similar ways, and that's where we get the count for our recycling rate.
Okay, this person's interested in the evolution from older blast furnaces to newer electric arc furnaces or mini mills. What does that mean for recycling? Is it higher recycled content?
That's an excellent question, and as a communicator, I probably wouldn't be able to give you the most detailed answer that you could get. There's a lot of people who would be able to talk more about the evolution. In terms of just purely moving into new technologies, that's something that obviously the steel industry takes pride in. We want to be known as innovative, and we want to be known as coming up with new materials. A lot of the situations we run into, or a lot of challenges we run into, especially from the communicative side, is people will say, yeah, steel is recycling and that's great, but what have you done for me lately? A lot of these materials who, may be just starting to discover technologies that are making their materials better to be recycled, more recyclable, um, they are getting, the press. They're making the strides now, and they're in the news, even though their recycling rate or their process might not be as efficient as steel's is. They're getting the notice now, and that's part of a lot of the confusion in terms of like greenwash, where people are just throwing things against the wall, saying, our material has X amount percentage less material than it did 5 years ago, and things like that. So if I can get that question person's contact information, I can give you more details about your specific question. But in terms of just overall evolution of the technology, it's something we pride ourselves on, and we wouldn't be pushing new technology if it would hinder the recycling process at all, just because it's so vital to the rest of the cycle.
This question has to do with steel cans. What percentage of all U.S. steel production is steel cans?
I don't have that specific number. And all steel production is steel cans. I would probably get that type of information from somebody in my office who works for the Canned Food Alliance, who works specifically for containers. Um, and that's also a very specific number that I would have to double check with our sources to see what our public figure is. So that's another one that if you bear with me, if I get that information, I'll definitely be able to give you a better answer than I could right now.
Okay, here's another hardball technical question, Casey. Do you physically separate the recycled steel that comes in? For example, you will need ASME steel versus non-ASME steel. Appliances, for example, do not need ASME requirement, and so on.
Are they talking about separating it from at the mill, or from the? Well, I guess they don't have a follow-up question. I couldn't tell you, unfortunately. So I appreciate the question. I apologize. I can't give you more of a technical approach. I am more from the communicative side. So a lot of these questions, are still in my learning process over the last 3 years. So I could attempt to give you an answer, but you deserve a more detailed answer from somebody who's been in the industry longer than I and specializes in that area.
And we can follow up with answering these questions via email. Everyone who's
Mhm.
registered, we do have their email address, so we can.
Excellent. Yeah, I definitely want, they're definitely excellent questions, but I would just want to make sure I give the best response possible.
This question has to do with aerosol cans. Do you have to remove the cap or anything else from the can before putting it into the recycling bin?
Uh, no, absolutely not. Once the actual can is empty, the aerosol can, it takes no consumer preparation. It can be put immediately into, the blue bin or whatever curbside program you have, or drop-off facility. No preparation is needed. It's immediately recycled, and the lid part of the aerosol can is, all recycled as well.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. In closing, this webinar, like all the webinars, in this series have been recorded and will be made available as a YouTube video. Links to these videos can be found on both the National Recycling Coalition and Recycling Market websites. Thank you again for joining us. And again, thank you, Casey, for being our presenter. And we hope you will join us for next month's webinar, scheduled for Tuesday, August 20 at 1:30 Eastern Time. And have a great day.
Thank you very much.